Our guest tonight is Lisa Black. I've had the pleasure of getting to know her as a member of the Rogue Women Writers, but I've known of her a lot longer. She was first published in 2005 under the pen name Becca. She has since written a total of 18 novels, at least that's my count. She's been showered with critical acclaim. Parish, her third book in the Gardner-Renner series, was nominated for the inaugural Sue Grafton Memorial Award, and she's received high praise from the likes of PW and Booklist. Her latest book, Every Kind of Wicked, received a starred Kirkus review, and I quote, "Forensic Maggie Gardner investigates a series of murders as baffling as they are terrifying. First-rate plotting and a compelling cast of characters." But we can't stop there. In her day job, she is a forensic scientist at the Cuyahoga County Coroner's Office, where she analyzes gunshot residue on hands and clothing, hairs, fibers, paint, glass, DNA, blood, and many other forms of trace evidence, as well as crime scenes. In fact, she was nearly late tonight. She sent me an email because of a possible homicide in Cuyahoga County today. I hope she'll tell us about that. She is a member of the American Academy of Forensic Scientists, the International Association for Identification, the International Association of Bloodstain Pattern Analysts, and a certified crime scene analyst. And tonight, she is going to tell us about her distinctly nonlinear path to publication and how her work as a forensic specialist has been pivotal in bringing her characters to life. She will talk about her cases, agents, pitfalls, and publishers, and she will take questions at the end of her talk. So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, but we are going to unmute you so you can ask them later. With no further ado, I give you Lisa Black.
Hello, and thank you for the great introduction, Chris. I need to clarify a few things though. I started at the Cuyahoga County Coroner's Office in Cleveland, Ohio. I am now in Florida at the Cape Coral Police Department. A lot of C's, that's the whole problem. But basically, yes, my name is Lisa Black and murder is my day job. I'm a forensic specialist down here in Cape Coral. We're by Fort Myers. And I think I love my job, even on days like this one was, because I basically listen to stories all day long. You know, everyone has a story, and figuring out what it is and how it fits into current events is what being an investigator or a writer is all about. But I didn't get to either of these two careers in a straight line. I always wrote, as far back as I can remember. I would write stories. I would write letters to my favorite cousin when I was very small. And I would always include a story putting us in our favorite TV shows, which at the time was Batman and Star Trek, no, the original Star Trek, what they would call fan fiction today. And I only wrote mysteries and adventure, and I always wanted to be a detective, but I didn't want to be a cop. I wanted to be a detective like Ellery Queen was a detective, where you just work your own hours, and then, you know, when you figure it out, you call everybody into the library and tell them who did it, and all the arresting and chasing people is left to someone else. But all this detoured in high school when I visited Washington, D.C., and I just fell in love with the city, meaning I loved the buildings and the monuments and all the marble, not what people actually did there. What people actually did there bored me silly. So I should have been an architect. Instead, I majored in political science, graduated with no marketable skills whatsoever except typing, and became a secretary for 10 years. I was a personnel secretary. So I was sitting in front of a word processor all day and thought, what the heck, I'll write a novel. How hard can it be? So I wrote 6. All of which are sitting in a box in my attic and should remain there. By the third one, I deigned to contact an agent, although I felt sure I didn't really need one. In fact, I think that's how my query letters started out, something to the effect that I didn't think I really needed an agent. So you can imagine how well that went over. So by the 6th book, I figured out I not only needed an agent, I needed a new day job. So I went back to school on my lunch hour and after work to get a degree in biology, specifically to go into forensics. So when a position at the coroner's office in Cuyahoga County opened up, I finally got to work long hours for lousy pay in a badly ventilated building, an hour's commute from my home, with carcinogens, biohazards, bleeding, decomposing bodies, and a slightly pathological boss. I was in heaven. And this was pre-CSI, but post-Silence of the Lambs. So when I went to a party, people actually wanted to talk to me. That had never happened before. I didn't write while I was at the coroner's office. I didn't have time. I didn't even read except for textbooks and true crime. But I was experiencing. So for 5 blissful years, I experienced until my husband got fed up with Cleveland weather, which is pretty crappy, and dragged me 1,400 miles south to Florida. So suddenly I had no job, no friends, no family. I think I started writing again just to stay sane. It gave me something to focus on other than how miserable I was. And since I always wrote mysteries, it just made sense to now apply the forensic background to telling the mystery story. And at the same time, a little show called CSI had premiered, and the stars sort of aligned. I was no longer deigning to contact agents. I was flat out begging for one. And I had been a secretary, so I was very organized. I had a 6-page landscape font, single-spaced spreadsheet of agents that, I had Googled and checked out. I kept track of when I contacted them and if they responded and if I sent them sample chapters, etc. I would send out 10 query letters at a time. No matter what they asked for, I just sent them a query letter. It saved a lot on postage. Although I suppose in today's world, everything's done through email. That's not really a consideration anymore. But they'd say no. And after another book or two, I got, better, at least at writing query letters, that they'd ask to see sample chapters and then they'd say no. And then a few times they'd ask to see the whole manuscript and then they'd say no. And then one momentous day in 2004, my first agent, Elaine Koster, called up and asked to represent me. And I said yes. I had already checked her out. I knew she had legitimate sales, but she was no one I had a special in with or anything. I was just another query letter that showed up on her desk. So she auctioned my first novel to Hyperion, but I never quit the day job. Good thing. In my work at the police department, about 90% of my time is spent sitting in front of a computer looking at fingerprints, which is exactly as exciting and glamorous as it sounds. We process crime scenes, burglaries, robberies, of course, any homicides. We only have maybe 4 a year. Suicides, sexual assaults, grow houses, which is when someone's converted the inside of their home to a marijuana farm. Do a lot of photography. We handle everything from criminal mischief to homicide, basically. And it's a comfortable job, except when you have to process an unair-conditioned home in the middle of August in Florida, or when you have to get out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning for a drive-by shooting. One time I had to get out of bed in the middle of the night because someone stole cigarettes from the Hess station. Not kidding. And there's just nothing exciting or glamorous or cool about this job at 2 o'clock in the morning. Not when you're over 50. So anyway, back to the writing. After this first initial success, I made the mistake of thinking for the second book that America might have had their fill of seeing serial killers killing beautiful young women. So I tried to do something different. I had wrote something about a dead baby in a dysfunctional family. And after working on this book with my agent, we finally gave it to the publisher and quickly learned that America will never get tired of serial killers killing beautiful young women. And Hyperion said, this is not going to work at all. We need you to throw it out and write something else, basically. But I had actually been getting together ideas for book 3, so I just wrote that as fast as I could. But of course, then I got behind on the production schedule, and the second book didn't come out for over a year and a half after the first one. And, you know, it was just pretty much disaster. So I wrote Takeover, which was the first book in the Teresa McLean series, wound up being the first one. And I was very excited about it. It's still probably my second favorite of all my books. And Elaine told me, my agent told me, I love it, but they're going to drop you. Even if they adore this book, they're still going to drop you because your sales from the second book weren't good enough. So we started making plans. She suggested that I change my name because, of course, everybody's looking for the next big thing instead of someone who didn't hit the bestseller list on their first or second book. But the basics of the story, you know, the forensic scientist heroine and her homicide detective boyfriend and the teenage daughter were such an integral part of Takeover that I wound up basically just changing everyone's name and keeping the same book. And my agent shopped it around and sold it to Carolyn Marino at HarperCollins, who actually guessed who I really was before the purchase, and they bought the book anyway, which I thought was quite a compliment. And I was with HarperCollins for 4 books, and things were going really well until a number of things happened. There was the financial crash of 2008, combined with the market adjustment of publishers to the power of the ebook, and that created the pubocalypse. When publishers, you know, dropped all their mid-list authors right and left, and even New York Times best-selling authors with a TV series had to take a pay cut in order just to stay in print. My sales slumped. My first fabulous agent, Elaine, was diagnosed with a fast-acting form of breast cancer and passed away unexpectedly. For a while, it seemed that her assistant would be taking over the agency, but then I ran into another one of her clients who said that she had been told they're not going to be negotiating any new contracts. When they were planning to tell me that, I have no idea, but clearly it was time I was going to have to find a new agent. So in early 2011, in the same week, I learned that my mother, who had begun to ail, was going to be passing away sooner rather than later. My husband lost his job, and I found out that it was going to be a lot more difficult to get an agent than I had hoped. However, Vicky Bejour, who's my current agent, took me on, for which I'm still eternally grateful. She helped me with a book that wasn't even, you know, hers. She wasn't even the agent for it and didn't get a percentage of. And at this time, my editor at HarperCollins was perusing what was the 4th book in that series and wanted some major changes, which dragged on through the rest of the year. So finally, the following January, I told Vicky, I understand he doesn't want to give me bad news during the Christmas holiday, but it's a new year and I really deserve an answer. So finally they said, no, we're not going to be offering you a new contract. So for the next 3 books, I went with Severin House, which is a small British publisher. And they were wonderful to work with. And I actually earned out the advance because it was so much smaller than what HarperCollins gave me. But they did not allow bookstores to make returns. So bookstores would not order them at all. And my sales dropped to only Amazon and libraries. So while presenting at the BoucherCon Mystery Convention in Cleveland, a woman from Kensington Press came up and introduced herself and said she had heard my panel and would be willing to look at something of mine. And meanwhile, I had been working on what became the 7th book in the Teresa McLean series, in which my character Teresa, who's a forensic scientist, comes back from a late night call, traffic accident in the middle of the night, comes into the morgue, and there should be like 2 deskmen on duty. And one has been beaten to death with the word confess written in his blood, and the other one is missing. And my agent didn't like it. She didn't think it was suspenseful enough. And I said, she's creeping around a morgue alone in the middle of the night, looking for the killer of the coworker whose body she just stumbled over. I don't think I can make it more suspenseful than that. I just really don't. So in disgust, I threw that inside and started writing this scene that had been rattling around in my head for a couple of years about what if there's a man who takes the worst of the city's criminals, the ones who, never get caught because they never get into a court of law to begin with. And he doesn't hate them. He knows they're just a product of their environment. So he sits them down and plies them with their favorite food and drink and listens to them. And when they're about as relaxed and happy as it's possible for them to get in this world, he puts 3 bullets in the back of their head. Because to him, this is the humane and responsible thing to do. So he's very careful to always get the right person. He does all his homework and doesn't leave any traces. And this is all going very well until a forensic scientist by the name of Maggie Gardner picks up his trail. Well, then he has quite the moral dilemma. So I wrote maybe 3 pages, 3 or 6 pages of this story and sent it off to my agent. And she said, I love it, write the rest of it. So I'm like, oh, that's great. That was nice to hear, but I had no idea what was going to happen in the rest of the book. I'm like, well, okay, I guess at some point these 2 people have to encounter each other. But other than that, I had no plans. So anyway, that became That Darkness. And we sold it to the agent, the editor from Kensington that I met at BoucherCon, who's still my editor there. And we now have 6 books out in that series. And the most recent one is, as Chris said, is Every Kind of Wicked. And in this, Maggie and Jack take on people I love to hate, which is scammers. I've been studying scammers, email scammers and fraudsters and the people that call you on the phone and tell you that your computer is sending out error messages, or or your the IRS is going to swear out a warrant for your arrest and the marshals are coming to your house, and those kind of people. Oh, and they can lower your credit card interest rates always. And most people have the sense not to answer. I do, because I just am dying to know who these people are. It's like, why do they do this? I mean, I know they're usually in very poor areas and they're just desperate for a job and they have to take whatever they can. But, the people they're stealing from are usually, the vulnerable elderly and other vulnerable people. So it's not okay. So I keep talking to them. I was talking to one just today that said he was calling from the IRS. And I said, well, this is the Cape Coral Police Department. How can I help you? And he asked me to tell him who was the chief of police and who was the assistant deputy chiefs. And he had me spell the name of the city. And and then I got one of the deputy chiefs wrong. And he said, no, it's Tony, what his name is. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. I can't keep track, because he was Googling it. Why? I don't know. It's like, can't you figure out you're not going to convince me you're in the IRS? So why he was even wasting time with it? I think he was just screwing with me. I don't know. But they're difficult to figure. Anyway, I could talk about that forever. But in the book, Maggie and Jack are on the trail of this shadowy pill-popping physician who seems to be everywhere and nowhere at once. And at the same time find this illegal call center and this young man who's somehow connected to it, but they're not quite sure how, who's found dead in a cemetery a couple weeks before Christmas. And that's what Every Kind of Wicked is about. So as far as writing and getting published, I can't advise anybody about when they should hire an agent or how to approach a publisher. I can only say what happened to me. And I think if you don't have friends in high places and you're not the next J.K. Rowling and you want to be traditionally published, hire an agent. I always believe that 85% of something is better than 100% of nothing. But it depends on you and where your strengths lie. I get a decent amount of marketing support from Kensington, and I still spend way more time on it than I would prefer. I mean, it keeps Chris and I, Chris can swear to this, how much time we put into the promotion. But some people truly enjoy it and are really, really good at it. And some people come from backgrounds in marketing and public relations, so it's something they're really familiar with. Some people have day jobs that provide avenues for promotion. So the bad news is, of course, there's a lot of competition, and we're all just one drip in this vast churning ocean of the market. But the good news is that ocean is hungry for content and always will be. And talent and ability are still the only things that really matter, because they're the only things that persist. And that's pretty much all my prepared remarks. Can we open it up now for questions and answers about forensics, about, writing, anything I can tell you?
Well, I wanted to ask you a little bit about how obviously do you use real cases that you have worked on in your books, in your stories? It sounds to me like you research ideas more than you use what you actually come across.
Right. I use all the little details of forensic work in my books. I use a lot of, I'm always kind of trying to be the anti-CSI, to show you that things are not as simple or as easy as, TV makes it seem, that how these forensic tests work in the real life and what they actually, prove or don't prove. And so many things just indicate something instead of actually prove it. So I'm always trying to do that, but lots of little tiny details make their way into the books. Lots of times when my character says, oh, I had a case where that's from real life. And like in the one I'm working on right now, I just had the guy was stabbed and fell in the knife, but they couldn't see the knife anywhere. I mean, he had these 3 stab wounds and they're not finding a knife. But he's in this little kitchen, and so she wants to look under the stove and see if the knife skittered under there, but the floor is covered in blood. So she puts down a clean bag and puts the camera on the floor, because she's not putting her head down there, and takes a picture that way, and then she can see under the stove. And my agent thought that was like so cool, and I'm like, yeah, I actually did that. Because we had a guy committed suicide, and we were thinking it was a homicide because we couldn't find the knife anywhere. And that's exactly where it was. It was under the stove. So little details like that are very, very, one scene, I had the character show up because it was the middle of the night and she'd been called out like 3 nights in a row and she was exhausted, and she gets to the scene, and the one cop says, "Are you all right?" She goes, "Yeah." And he says, "Your shirt's on inside out." It's like, yeah, I actually did that too. And it was like the cutest cop we have that pointed it out to me. It was like really embarrassed. Well, I got dressed in the dark. I didn't want to wake up my husband. So little things like that I use in the book. Most murders in real life are not interesting enough to sustain a whole book. Now there are the 2 exceptions is Trail of Blood, because I use as a basis the torso killings in Cleveland in the 1930s. During the Depression. It was basically Cleveland, America's version of Jack the Ripper. He killed at least 12 people, probably twice that. He dismembered a bunch. He killed both men and women. He was never caught. He was never identified. And so in the book, the killings start over again. And Teresa, knowing her Cleveland history as she does, recognizes what this pattern is. And in Evidence of Murder, we had a case in Cleveland where this woman worked as an escort and went missing. And, that sounds a little sleazy to most people, but she had, a decent house in a decent suburb. She had an 8-year-old daughter. She had a steady living boyfriend. She was not the kind who would just disappear, but that's what happened. And we always thought her last client killed her. but we could never prove it. And there was no relationship. She had never met him before. He just called up the agency, and she was up. So I started with the idea of this married missing escort with a child. And then I was at our medical examiner's office here in Florida, and the assistant said to me, "Oh, I know the perfect way to kill somebody because it wouldn't leave any trace at all." It was a case he had worked in Miami, and he said, "I'm writing a paper about it for the Medical Investigators Journal." So of course I said, "Tell me more." And that became evidence of murder.
So tell us what your normal day is like. You did say that you spend a lot of time looking at fingerprints. I mean, we all watch the CIS where they've got the machine that's running the matches, and you're just looking there to see if anything pops for you, right? Or do you actually match?
Well, both. I do have the fingerprint system, but of course, how it starts is I either have to collect fingerprints off an item of evidence or pick them up at a crime scene, or most often police officers have picked them up at crime scenes and they turn them in. So the paperwork, like any other area of life, and we're accredited now. We're accredited in crime scene, and we're going for accreditation in latent. So we have really particular ways we have to do everything. So it has to be signed in and then put in a folder. Then the examiner takes it, and then they sign it, and then they have to look at each card and initial it and fill it out, the little code that we use for what kind of quality the print is, and put all this on the form. Then you have to scan it or photograph it into the computer system, then mark all the little points on it. Then I search the county database and the state database, and the state takes a while longer to come back. The county is pretty quick, so then I have to go back later and check the results. And that's what's really time consuming, actually. Putting the fingerprints in goes pretty quick, but sitting there looking at two, deciding if they're the same or not, can take a lot of time depending on the quality of the print. And then I have to print it off and sign it, and then I have to put it in the pile to be verified. And then another examiner comes by, when she on her shift, and takes it out, looks at it on the screen, and goes back and forth, and then she'll sign off. Then it comes back to me. I have to write the report, print if I make an identification, print the report, sign it, send it back to her. She has to sign it in the computer and on the.
So how much time is spent doing all of this kind of
paperwork
versus being
a lot
at a crime scene? I mean, what happens when you get sent out to the crime scene? Do you have a certain way that you begin?
Yes. Basically, every crime scene, whether it's like I said, criminal mischief to homicide, we usually start with photographs. The first thing we do is take photographs of, we start right there in the street as soon as we get out of the car. Take a picture of the house, so you know where you are, and then do you have a team like they show on NCIS where one person's doing the photographs and one person's doing something else? Do you trade jobs around, or do you have a specific thing? Yeah. Like at this possible homicide, I mean, at a burglary, no, there's nobody there but me. I'm doing it all. Well, a police officer is always there with me too. That's kind of important because we're civilian employees. We're not armed. So whenever we are at a scene, there's a police officer there with us. If they're not there, we don't get out. I mean, I'll get out of the car. It's not like I'm in a dangerous area, but I would be calling up dispatch saying, "Where's the police officer?" Because we don't go to the scene without them. So, but at say like this homicide today, my coworker took the videoed the whole outside the house and then the inside the house. I did the still photography, whole outside the house, inside the house. And then her specialty is computer electronics. She'll download computers and cell phones. So she was in one room in what they call their computer room at this house. And she collected the computer and all that kind of thing. And I was working in the bedroom with the body. And of course we had you know, 4 detectives there and our supervisor, and it was much nicer when they all left because then we could work in peace. So yeah, we do split up.
And so when you go to a homicide like you did today and you're working, is the coroner release the body to you? Is that how that works? Does the coroner have to?
No. The body is the jurisdiction of the coroner or medical examiner's office. The whole rest of the scene is the jurisdiction of the police department. So we can't touch the body. I mean, I touched it to see if it was cold or not, but we can't move it. They'll get really irate with you if you do that before they get there. So, I mean, I can, you know, I photograph the body. I can do anything without touching it, but we can't touch it or move it. We can't even roll it over to see if she's got a knife sticking out of her. We're not supposed to pull the wallet out of the pocket to see, you know, if we can get an identification of who it is. You know, you do not do anything to molest the body until they get there. But we can do the whole rest of the scene. If I wanted to dust for prints, you know, I measured the room, I sketched, I did everything else before they got there. Now, if it's, you know, if it looks like it's a natural death, and these rules are always shifting because it's up to them. So they can do whatever they want. They might say, well, we will release it so that that will decline to respond. So the medical examiner investigator is not going to come out. Then we can flip it over. We can, you know, the body over. We can examine them. We can look in their eyes and their mouth and do anything else we want. They will usually still send their ambulance crew, and they'll take the body to the medical examiner's office and do an autopsy, but they don't need to come to the scene. We can do whatever we want at the scene. Or sometimes they'll decline entirely and a funeral home can just come and pick up the person and it doesn't need to go through them at all.
So, Mike, do you want to ask the question yourself? I've unmuted you.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I believe when we had the Denver crime lab guy in, he said that their CSIs were sworn officers. In other words, they were authorized to carry firearms. Is that unusual, or does that vary widely?
That varies. It depends on whatever the agency's rules are. And that actually, yeah, that's a friend of mine from the coroner's office who was a doctor, genetics actually, I think, or a master's, I don't remember. But she worked at the coroner's office with me in the trace evidence department. She wound up going to Denver. This was like 20 years ago. But they did. She had to go through the academy. She had to carry a gun. You know, they don't actually make arrests or anything like that just because they don't usually need to and they've got too much else to do. But yes, it all depends. Las Vegas, like the show CSI, they are sworn officers and do carry guns in Las Vegas. They don't in Miami, but they wanted consistency between the shows. So they show them carrying guns in Miami, even though that's not true. But it's whatever the rules are, whatever, you know, whatever agency you work for.
Okay. Sue had a question. Sue, I've asked you to unmute. Can you unmute?
Yeah, my question is, what are the biggest forensic mistakes that most mystery writers make?
Oh, that's a good question. I notice mistakes on television a lot more. I don't really notice too many in books. You know, I probably do as I'm reading, but they don't usually, you know, go into that much detail, at least not the ones I've been reading. On TV, I mean, the mistake I see most often is them picking up a piece of evidence before photographing it. That drives me nuts. Like, you didn't take a picture of that. Don't touch it. Or like taking pictures of something without a scale, like shoe prints. tire tracks, fingerprints. You have to have a scale by that, or the photograph isn't going to do you any good. You take a picture without the scale first, but then you have to take a picture with the scale. Scale isn't important in all cases. I mean, if you're taking a picture of a shirt, you don't need to put a ruler by it. So things like that, and not understanding roles. I guess what I see writers doing is not understanding the roles of who does what at a crime scene, kind of, because the detective is in charge of the investigation. Basically, I'm there to, present forensic support, but it's their show. If they want me to do something that probably isn't wise, I will have to eventually do it. I mean, my job is to tell them that's not a good idea because of this, that we need to get this evidence off that, but if they insist, then it's on them. I need to make a note of that in my notes and leave it at that, because they are in charge of the investigation. And, things like rank, like sergeant actually outranks detective. Some of our detectives have taken the sergeant's exam, gone back to being a sergeant, went back in uniform and back on the road and everything else, because it pays more and it's a higher rank. Jurisdiction between city, county, you're just in your jurisdiction of what's your agency. Like, so many people will say, oh, didn't you work this murder that I read about last week? Like, no, that's in Fort Myers. I'm Cape Coral, different city. And I was just listening to a podcast, and she was saying that it was strange that her uncle's murder was not investigated by the state police, who were 500 feet up the road, but the sheriff's deputies investigated it again then. And I'm like, that's because the state police wouldn't be called in for a homicide, unless the sheriff's deputies, requested them. Or I believe, unless it took place on a state route, or if it was an unincorporated area, maybe. But then if it was unincorporated, then it would probably be the county. So there's all these other kind of things. And the funniest thing, what?
Go ahead.
And what I was just laughing with somebody about this, I think J.D. Allen, about how they always argue about jurisdiction in on TV. And in books, it's like the county police and the city police are like, this is our case. No, it's our case. No, it's our case. In real life, it's like, hey, you want this case and you can do all the work. And if it doesn't get solved, it's going to remain an unsolved case on your books. Have at it. See ya.
So I have a question. When you're looking at the evidence, what if the detectives and everyone decides, oh, this is natural causes or something? Have you ever said, no, this is actually homicide, and been the one to turn the case around?
I wish I could say that, but no, I don't think so. It's usually more likely the opposite. Usually, they're thinking it's a homicide and it's a crime of the century, and we're like, no, not necessarily, and like the one today, I mean, there's a few things that bother me about it, but I think at the same time, it's like, this is a grown person, relatively healthy. It's really hard to kill a grown adult without leaving any trace at all. I mean, there's no signs of strangling, there's no injuries, there's no petechiae in the eyes, so it doesn't, indicate, smothering. So it's like, it's probably a natural, because I don't see how on earth he could have killed her without leaving any mark at all. So that
segues right into ZJ's question. ZJ, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, Lisa.
Hi.
This is an existential question for you. After you see all these dead bodies,
Mhm.
has it affected your outlook on life at all, and how so?
I think so. I mean, I hope so. Actually, I think it's had a really good effect because it really brings home that life is short, and live it to the fullest. Do what you want to do. That's why I travel. I go to, I've been to Europe, I've been to Tahiti, we've been to Australia, and it's like we were supposed to this June be on a river cruise, my two sisters and I, on a river cruise from Bucharest to Budapest. But then, of course, the coronavirus happened. So, and the other part of that is my parents were elderly, and we hang out. All our whole social circle down here is retired elevator men and their wives. So I call them my retiree homies. So I know that I want to be able to do all that before I need a knee replacement, because I probably will. So, I mean, my mother had one, my sister had one, I jog, so I'm pretty sure I'm going to need it. So do things now. That's what I don't want to wait.
And Bruce, you had a question. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, we got it. So Lisa, you've produced quite a few books, and you're working full time and traveling when you can. So are you naturally just a fast writer? Do you have a process that you think enables you to produce full-length books fairly quickly? Or tell us about your writing process itself.
Well, I guess I do write pretty quickly, which I don't think is a good thing. I don't encourage myself to do that, but I mean, I can write 1,000 words in an hour and a half. My process is I usually spend a couple months planning it out, thinking about when I want to write, and it's like kind of in the back of my head, I'm going around, well, this is going to happen and this is going to happen, but then that doesn't really flow from that. So what's going to happen in between? And this doesn't make any sense. And, just not in any sort of formal way, just stuff's coming to me. And then eventually I'll do some sort of outline. My goal is to make this incredibly detailed outline that has every single thing I'm going to need. And I have never yet achieved that. And I'm actually feel like I'm getting worse instead of better about it. But I'm a plotter. So I always know before I begin, I know, how it's going to start, how it's going to end, who dies, who killed them, why, and the major plot points or pieces of evidence that the character is going to find that's going to tell her that. So I don't really get writer's block once I start, because I always know what I have to do next. It's like I can wake up every morning thinking, okay, well, now I got to do this, and then I got to do that. So, I know where I'm going in the book. And now I lost track of what I was going to say after that. But once I'm ready to start, I'm usually not ready. I usually start before I'm ready. As I say, my goal is to always have every single thing planned out, but I'll start getting antsy and I'll start getting anxious about it. And then I'll just be dying to start, and I'll start when I haven't really got everything figured out. But once I start, I write every day usually. I've tweaked this over the years. It's like for a while I was doing like 2,000 words a day, 5 days a week, and taking the weekends off. And then I was doing, when I really am strict with my current schedule, I'm on a rotating shift. So I was doing like 1,000 words a day on the days I work and 2,000 on the days I don't work, which averages out to a nice 10,000 a week. I love that. But I've gotten to, lackadaisical about that. So now I'm basically just doing 1,000 words a day, 7 days a week.
Do you write a draft and then go back and rewrite from the beginning, or do you edit as you go?
Well, I I edit a little bit as I go, but basically once I start, I have to keep going all the way to the end, because I just have this fear that if I stop, I won't start again. So, I mean, other than vacations and major holidays, I pretty much have to stick to that writing schedule until I get done. And then I might take a couple days off and start on the second draft. And then I'll usually do a second draft and a third draft. And usually by then I'm so sick of it, I never want to see it again. And again, I get antsy. So I send it off to my agent. And then, there's that blissful time. It's like, oh, well, I can't do anything until I hear back from her. So it's, it's vacation. And so when I'm completely done and it's off in the shoot, either waiting for her or waiting for the editor, then I don't write at all, other than letters. I'm still a chronic letter writer. And, but other than that, I don't write at all. So I may not write for months in between books. I don't know, guess I'm okay with that.
So we're getting close to 8 o'clock, but we would have time for another question or two if somebody has a question. Want to either type it in the chat or raise your hand so I can see to unmute you. Oh, okay, ZJ, you can unmute yourself, I think.
So Lisa, who do you look to as your favorite author or author that inspires you?
Oh, well, it started with Ellery Queen. That's Ellery Queen is still my goal, to have 10,000 clues and they all fit together perfectly. That was still my favorite. But I think Tammy Hogue and Lisa Gardner, as far as story structure, really, really influenced me. The first book I got published, Trace Evidence, I took Tammy Hogue's Ashes to Ashes and actually sat down and propped it up next to my computer and thought, okay, well, she works in like her age and height and weight on the first page. I'm going to do that. She's got this slightly obnoxious supervisor. Oh, he's a bit of a chauvinist. Okay, I'm going to work that in. And it was a totally different story, but it was the same, structure in a way. And that gave me a little bit of a jump start. And although her first chapter had absolutely nothing to do with the whole rest of the book. Well, Tammy Hogue can get away with that. I can't. By the time my agent was done with it, that entire first chapter got axed. But, it got me in the door. So it was worth it. And Lisa Gardner, I realized that she always starts her book off with something, dramatic, like violent or dramatic, that usually winds up with someone either being dead or missing, because missing is so much more interesting than dead, because that raises all sorts of questions. I mean, are they missing voluntarily or not voluntarily? Are they dead? Are they still alive? It's like missing is a great way to start a book. And also, CJ, I had tickets to The Curious Incident of the Dog of the Nighttime. And then coronavirus, I was supposed to see it in June, so anyway.
Bummer.
Yeah.
Is anybody else? One more question. Margaret?
Oh, good. I was going to let somebody else ask, but I get to ask. Lisa, you mentioned earlier that you did way more promotion than you wish you did.
Yeah.
What kinds of things do you do for your promotion?
Well, Chris and I are in Rogue Women Writers, so we do a lot with, one of us, we have a blog every week. We have other, we've started having a mystery. ZJ does his Mystery Minute once a month. We do Rogue Reads. We just started doing Rogue Reads a couple months ago, where we have other authors come on. But we also try and keep up the social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And on my own, I had always, not always, but the past at least 10 books, done a virtual tour when a book's coming out, just contact people and say, you know, can I write a guest blog on your site? And they're usually happy to do it because, you know, they get out of writing a blog that day, and it exposes you to all sorts of new fans, or, you know, people who are fans of their blog are suddenly introduced to you. So that's a great way to do it. And the beautiful thing about virtual tours is they're free, and you can do them totally in advance. And I actually heard another author, and I started doing it too. She said, write your blogs for all these guest blogs while you're writing, or write it like right after you finish the book or while you're writing the book, so that you because by the time the book comes out, it's, you know, a year and a half later, and you're in another book entirely, and you've forgotten half of that book. So it's kind of difficult to go back sometimes. And you know, virtual tours are a great thing. And of course,
you were also guest of honor, weren't you? A guest of honor, supposed to be a guest of honor this year at
Killer Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
And coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
But they have graciously asked me to come next year. Just shifted all their guests of honor to Killer Nashville 2021. So I get a whole nother year of saying I'm a guest of honor. Just kind of cool.
Great. Well, I want to thank you for coming on and talking and telling us everything about yourself. You can contact Lisa through her website, through Rogue Readers or Rogue Women Writers. She's going to be the MC of Rogue Reads on Monday night. We're having Lynn, oh, my brain.
Elsie Shaw.
Yeah, Elsie Shaw. And she's one of the rogues, and I can't think of her freaking name right now. This is how brain dead I am. And Robert DiSiderio, who is an actor who has now written a mystical thriller. It's very literary and very interesting. His wife is Judith Light, who some of you may know. And then Robert Poby, who is like a reclusive thriller writer, who's a great writer, but his agent threatened him, and that's why he's agreed to be on Rogue Reads. So we'll see how that goes. And then who's the other? Yeah.
That's it. Those four.
Yeah, there's one more. I thought you were the MC. So.
Yeah, I'm MC, but we have two Roberts, Robert DiSiderio.
Samantha Downing. Samantha Downing.
Oh, you're right.
Yes,
you're
Samantha
right.
Downing.
Sorry,
Anyway,
sorry.
so we check it out. We do stream it live, and it'll be at 7 o'clock, 5 o'clock Mountain Time.
Yeah, but recordings will be on our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Of that and past Rogue Reads as well. So if you want to check out some, in the past we've had Ace Atkins, and I'm drawing a blank. Now I'm drawing a blank.
I know we had a lot of people.
We had Heather Graham. We've had incredible
David Hescawanley Wyden, who is just hitting it like crazy, hitting it out of the ballpark. He's a Colorado writer right now, and yeah, I mean, and Gary Phillips. We've had a Robin Purcell. We've had a lot of great people, and they're posted on the website. So, yeah, if you want to check them out, you should. It's pretty fun. It's really pretty fun. And Lisa does a great job. We have snacks and drinks. We have every author give us a snack and a drink, and she always makes them. So she will toast with their drink of choice. She was drunk by the end of all of these. No. Very good. So, but thank you, Lisa. We appreciate it. And
well, thank you so much for asking me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah.